The hall was cold. Not the kind of cold that came from low temperature, but the kind that came from being somewhere you were not wanted. Ambassador Yuna walked through the long silver corridor of Akonum Prime with her head straight and her hands still at her sides. The walls were tall and smooth, built from pale stone that the Dominari had brought from their home world 2,000 years ago. Everything here was made to make visitors feel small. Yuna did not feel small. She was the voice of the unified Earth Federation, and she had walked these halls 9 times before. Each time she had sat in the lower seats, the ones below the main platform, the ones given to visitors and lesser species. Each time she had listened to the council speak down at her. Each time she had carried their words back to Earth like a bag full of stones. Today was the 10th time. She already knew it would be the last. The Grand Forum was a wide, round room with a domed ceiling made of dark glass. Through it, the stars were visible, cold and distant. 27 delegate platforms rose in a wide circle, each one lifted high and lit with the soft colored light of its home species. The Dominari platform was the tallest. It always was. High Chancellor Vrethai stood when Yuna entered. He was almost 3 meters tall, with 6 arms folded across his chest and skin the color of deep water. His eyes were yellow and flat. He looked at her the way a man looks at a small animal that had walked into the wrong room. He did not greet her. He simply began to read. The words came in the shared galactic tongue, translated through the small device behind Yuna's ear. Vrethai spoke about humanity's long history of aggression. He spoke about the danger Earth posed to galactic order. He listed, one by one, the reasons the Council had chosen to act. His voice was flat and calm, like a man reading a set of basic instructions. Then came the terms. The Unified Earth Federation had 90 galactic days to reduce its military fleet by 70%. All warships above a Class 4 rating had to be broken down and destroyed under Council eyes. Earth would accept a group of Council-chosen observers who would watch over all government decisions for at least 50 years. Every research program involving quantum-fold technology would be handed to the Council at once. Every scientist who had worked on those programs would submit to full review. And if the UEF refused, all hyperspace routes to and from Earth's solar system would be sealed. Every trade deal would be canceled. Every species currently in contact with humanity would be forced to end that contact or face punishment of their own. Earth would be cut off from the rest of the galaxy, left alone, nothing coming in, nothing going out. This is not a punishment, Vrethai said. His yellow eyes moved across Yuna like she was something small and unimportant. This is your last chance to exist within the order of this galaxy. You are being given something we are not required to give. Several delegates made sounds of agreement. Some were low hums. Some were sharper clicks. All of them were the sounds of people who believed they had already won. Yuna stood still. She did not look at her datapad. She did not move. She let the last echo of Vrethai's voice die completely before she opened her mouth. Then she said 9 words. The Unified Earth Federation does not negotiate under threats. She picked up her datapad from the speaker's table. She smoothed the front of her jacket with one hand. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. For a moment, there was no sound at all in the Grand Forum. 27 delegates sat in their high seats and watched the human woman walk away, and not one of them spoke. Then one of them laughed. It was a low, rolling sound like stones inside a metal drum. Another joined it, then another. By the time the doors closed behind Yuna, the whole room was full of it. She did not look back. On Earth, deep under the city of Seoul, the UEF war room had no windows. It sat 7 levels below the street, behind 3 sets of heavy doors, powered by its own reactor. The walls were covered in screens. The screens were covered in data. Dozens of officers moved between stations, speaking in low voices, their faces lit up blue by the light of the displays. Supreme Commander Junho stood in the center of it all and watched Yuna walk out of the Grand Forum on the main screen. When the doors closed behind her, one of the officers started to speak, something about next steps, about more talks, about what could still be done diplomatically. Junho raised one hand. The room went quiet. He turned to the man on his right. Admiral Tiho was broad and steady, with the kind of face that never showed surprise. He had led fleets for 20 years and had been waiting for this moment for most of them. "Begin Operation Sovereign Answer," Junho said. His voice was not angry, not afraid, just certain. "All fleets, full mobilization." Tiho nodded once and turned to his console. And then, across the galaxy, things began to wake up. In the dark of empty space, far from any trade lane and far from any council sensor, warships powered on. Not tens of them, not hundreds, thousands. Their engines came to life one by one, then in groups, then all at once. The light of their drives burned bright and new in the black of space. In hidden shipyards built inside hollowed-out asteroids, behind the shadow of gas giants, in the space around moons no council ship had ever passed close enough to scan, the fleet of the unified Earth Federation stretched and breathed and made itself ready. Most of these ships had never been seen by anyone outside the UEF. Their designs had never appeared in any report given to the Council. Their captains had trained in total secrecy for years. Their crews had always known the order would come. It had come now. A young officer looked up from her console, her face caught between wonder and fear. "Sir," she said quietly, "all sectors are responding, every one of them." Junho was already looking at the screens. Thousands of green marks, each one a ship, each one a crew, each one a part of something the Council had never imagined existed. "Good," he said. He put his hands behind his back. He looked at the map of the galaxy on the largest screen in the room. All those stars, all those systems, all those routes that humanity had been locked away from for 300 years. He thought about the sound of the Council laughing at Yuna's back. His face did not change. It stayed still and calm, the way deep water stays still before something large begins to move under it. In the city above, Seoul moved through its evening. People ate dinner. Children came home. Music played somewhere far up in the streets. None of them knew what had just begun. None of them needed to. That was what people like Junho were for. 3 days after Yuna walked out of the Grand Forum, the galaxy was still talking about it. Every major news channel across the Council's member worlds had something to say. Some called it reckless. Some called it foolish. Some called it the last act of a desperate civilization that had run out of options and was now simply choosing to fall on its own terms. The most popular opinion, shared by commentators on 12 different worlds, was that humanity had finally made the mistake that would end it. None of them knew what was happening under the surface. Intelligence Director Jisoo stood in a secured room deep inside the UEF's main command facility in Busan. The room had no windows and only one door, and that door had 3 locks on it, all of which required different clearances to open. The walls were smooth and gray. The table in the center was long and dark. On it sat one datapad, 1 cup of cold tea that no one had touched, and a small projector showing a map of the galaxy with hundreds of small marks on it, each one a ship, each one a secret. Junho sat at the far end of the table. Admiral Tiho stood near the door with his arms crossed, as he usually did when he was in rooms where sitting felt wrong. Weapons strategist Minyu was beside him, holding his own datapad loosely, his eyes on the map. Jisoo looked at all of them. She was not a loud person. She never needed to be. When she spoke, people listened, not because she raised her voice, but because every word she used was exactly the right one and none of them were wasted. "They think we have 3,000 warships," she said. She placed one flat hand on the table. "We have 43,000. The number sat in the air of the room for a moment. Tiho already knew it. He commanded those ships, but hearing it said out loud, plainly in a small quiet room with no ceremony around it, still felt like something large. He let out a slow breath through his nose. Minyu said nothing. He looked at the map. Junho looked at Jisoo. "Show them," he said. Jisoo tapped the table. The projector shifted and the galactic map expanded, pulling outward until it showed the hidden staging zones, 9 of them, spread through the outer sectors and deep space corridors far beyond anything the Council had ever patrolled. The marks on the map were thick in those places, clustered together like stars in a dense region of sky. 43,000 marks, each one a warship, each one crewed, armed, fueled, and ready. "The Council has been given a version of our military capacity every 2 years since the inspection agreements were signed," Jisoo said. "They received those numbers from their own inspectors, who visited our registered facilities, counted our registered ships, and filed their registered reports." She paused. Every one of those visits was staged. Every facility they entered was a real facility, but not the only one. Every ship they counted was a real ship, but a fraction of the total. Every report they filed was accurate to what we showed them. Minyu looked up from his datapad. 47 inspection cycles, he said, almost to himself. "Not once." "Not once," Jisoo confirmed. She moved to the next part of the briefing. Outside the secured room, the facility hummed with its usual low noise, people moving through corridors, systems running, the distant sound of equipment somewhere several floors below. Inside the room, everything was still. Minyu set his datapad flat on the table and walked to the projector. He pulled up a new image, a long, wide shape, almost featureless, dark against a dark background. It took a moment to understand the scale of it. When the measurement markings appeared at the edges of the image, Tiho straightened up from the door. "That is a Ragnarok platform," Minyu said. "We have 12 of them." The shape on the screen was enormous. Not a ship in any normal sense, more like a structure that had been given engines. Each one had taken 6 years to build in isolated deep space facilities. Each one carried siege weapons capable of sustained heavy bombardment at ranges far beyond anything the Council's military had ever developed or defended against. They could reach a planet's surface from a distance so great that the planet's own defense systems would never get a lock. "We built them as a final option," Minyu said, "not for use, for presence." He looked at the image for a moment. "The goal is never to fire them." Junho nodded once. Minyu sat back down. Then the door opened and Heian came in. She was younger than most people expected her to be, given what she had built. She had the kind of face that looked like it was usually thinking about something even when it was at rest. She was tired, the deep, heavy tired that comes from years of work on something enormous. But she moved quickly and set her datapad on the table with the calm efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being nervous in rooms like this one. "Project IRONVEIL is complete," she said. She did not sit down. She pushed the datapad toward Junho and waited. He picked it up. IRONVEIL had started as a theory, a question that one of Heian's early research team members had asked in a meeting 9 years ago. The question was simple. If you could fold quantum frequency signals back on themselves at a ship's outer hull, would sensors pass through the fold and return false readings? The answer, after 2 years of testing, was yes. The answer, after 5 more years of refinement, was yes, at scale. The answer, after the last 2 years of engineering work that had pushed Heian and her team past the limits of everything they thought they knew, was yes, at any scale, across any distance, against any detection system currently known to exist in the Galactic Council's combined arsenal. IRONVEIL made ships disappear. Not fast, not confusing, just gone, invisible to every scan, every array, every passive or active detection method the Council had ever built or bought or been given. A ship under IRONVEIL was not a ship that was hard to find. It was a ship that was not there. "How many ships can it cover at once?" Junho asked. "All of them," Heian said. "Every one of the 43,000. At the same time in every sector, on my signal. Tiho pushed himself off the door and walked to the table. Simultaneously, he said. It was not quite a question. Simultaneously, Heian said. The system is distributed. Each ship carries its own emitter. My signal synchronizes all of them at once through a tight beam relay. It can also drop them all at once. She paused. Or sector by sector in any pattern you choose. Tiho looked at Junho. There was something in his face that was not quite a smile, more like a man who had believed in something for a long time and was now watching it become real. Junho set the datapad down. He looked around the table at each of them, Jisoo, Tiho, Minyu, Heian, and said nothing for a moment. There was nothing that needed to be said. They had all given years to this. Most of them had given more than years. They had given up quiet lives and easy choices and the chance to be ordinary people in an ordinary time. They had done it because they believed that one day the moment would come, and they had wanted humanity to be ready when it did. The moment had come. Good, Junho said simply. All of you good. Far away, on the neutral station of Arcanum Prime, the mood was very different. A private intelligence report had arrived at the Council's security office 12 hours earlier. It had not come from their usual channels, the ones that had been feeding them clean, calm, carefully managed information about Earth's military for 30 years. It had come from a private contractor working the outer sectors, a small operation that had stumbled across one of the UEF staging zones by accident during a routine survey job. The report was long and detailed and very, very wrong from the Council's perspective. Wrong because it showed numbers they did not want to believe. Wrong because it described ships they had no record of. Wrong because it painted a picture of a human military that bore no resemblance to the one in every database, every inspection record, every official document the Council had ever filed. Vrethais had read it alone in his chamber first. He had read it twice. He had then called the Council's own senior military analyst and asked him to review the report without telling him where it came from. The analyst had come back in 4 hours. His report was short and it confirmed, in careful language that tried very hard not to sound frightened, that the numbers in the document appeared to be credible. The emergency session of the Grand Forum was loud in a way it had not been in years. Delegates who had been laughing and satisfied 3 days ago were now standing in their high platforms and speaking over each other in sharp voices. The Dominari military advisor stood before the full council and said plainly that the UEF's true fleet strength, if the report was accurate, represented a force the council could not match with any realistic combination of assets currently available. "How is this possible?" one delegate called out. His voice bounced off the domed ceiling. Nobody had a good answer. Across the station, in the small UEF embassy room, Yuna sat alone at a plain table. Her datapad was in front of her. New messages had been arriving for the last 2 hours, cautious messages, carefully worded from delegates who had been coldly silent for years and were now suddenly interested in talking. She read each one. She put the datapad face down. She poured a cup of water and drank it slowly. She was not in a hurry. Back in Busan, Chief Science Advisor Sungho was preparing a public broadcast for Earth citizens. He was older than most of the people in the command facility, with gray at his temples and a manner of speaking that made difficult things feel simple and clear. He stood in front of a camera and spoke without notes. "For 300 years," he said, "they tested our patience. We spent those 300 years making patience unnecessary." The broadcast reached 40 billion people across Earth, the colonies, and every UEF vessel in known space. The people who heard it understood what it meant. Many of them had been waiting for those words, or words like them, for their entire lives. Some of them cried. Some of them laughed. Most of them just looked up at the sky, at the ceiling, at the space between stars they had never been allowed to reach, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that the distance was closing. The 91st galactic day arrived quietly. There was no special announcement, no dramatic countdown. The deadline simply passed the way all deadlines do. 1 second it had not yet come, and then it had. And with it, the last thin thread of diplomacy between the Galactic Council and the unified Earth Federation snapped clean. By mid-morning, the Council's blockade armada was moving. 8,000 warships from 12 different species dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system in a long, wide formation that stretched across the primary corridor like a wall built from metal and engines, and the absolute certainty that it would never need to move. The ships were large, some of them very large, and their running lights made them visible even at distance, a line of cold fire hanging in the dark. The Council had designed the formation to be seen. They wanted every sensor in every UEF facility pointing at that wall and understanding what it meant. It meant stop. It meant submit. It meant this is what the end of your options looks like. From the bridge of the UES Sovereign, Admiral Tiho watched the blockade form. The Sovereign had been built in a hidden shipyard on the dark side of Neptune over the course of 14 years, assembled piece by crews who rotated in and out under strict secrecy protocols. It was long and dark and shaped like a blade laid flat, and it was so large that the shipyard had been built around it rather than the other way around. Tiho had walked its corridors many times during construction. He had always felt in those walks something that he could not quite name, a sense of something held still and ready, the way a breath is held before an important word. He stood at the main viewport now and looked at the Council's wall of ships in the far distance. He let the moment sit. He studied the formation, the spacing, the positions, the clear lanes they had left open for escape routes that they assumed would be used. They had not left those lanes for humanity to use. They had left them for themselves. Tiho turned from the viewport. His voice was level and quiet when he gave the order. "Begin the sequence," he said. In 7 star systems at once, the IRONVEIL shields dropped. There was no sound to it, no flash of light, no visible sign that anything had changed. One moment, 9 staging zones spread across the galaxy held nothing but empty space. The next moment they held warships, thousands of them, tens of thousands, already formed, already positioned, already inside the defensive perimeters that the Council had spent years carefully mapping and monitoring. Humanity's fleet had not arrived. It had been there the whole time. The Council blockade armada, which had come to seal off Earth's solar system, found itself surrounded on every side before a single UEF officer had spoken a word. For every Council ship in that wall, there were more than 5 UEF vessels already in place around them. Not approaching, not closing in, just there. Weapons warm, engines steady, waiting. The formation that had looked so powerful from the outside was now just a cluster of ships sitting in the center of something far larger than itself. On 12 different Council flagships, alarms went off at the same moment. Bridge crews shouted readings at their commanders. Tactical screens filled with contact marks that had not been there a breath before. Senior officers called for silence and got silence, and then stared at what their sensors were showing them and could not make it make sense. Because sensors do not lie. Sensors show what is there. And what was there was not possible except that it was, and it was everywhere, and it had been there all along. While the Council blockade tried to understand what had just happened, Minu activated the second wave. 1 Ragnarok platform moved. Just 1 out of 12. It did not go to Earth's solar system. It did not move toward the blockade. It crossed through deep space at a steady pace and came to rest at the far edge of the Dominari home system, not close, not threatening in any immediate physical sense, just present, sitting there at long range, visible on every Dominari sensor array, enormous and dark and completely still. It did not charge its weapons. It did not send a transmission. It simply appeared at the edge of the most important system in the Dominari civilization and stayed there, The way a very large, very calm thing stays somewhere when it wants to be understood. Every Dominari military commander who looked at their screen that morning understood it. Across the galaxy, Field Commander Donghyun was already moving. He led his division in fast, precise strikes across the hyperspace toll stations, the relay points and gateway platforms that sat at the entrance of every major space lane, all of which had been locked to UEF ships for over a century. Some of them were staffed by small council security teams. Some were automated. All of them were taken in under 20 minutes from the first move. Donghyun's teams did not destroy anything. They did not harm the staff they found on the staff stations. They secured them, treated them with basic courtesy, gave them water, and explained clearly that they were not prisoners but that they should remain calm and stay where they were until further notice. The automated stations were simply taken over and rekeyed. No weapons fired, no one killed, no station damaged beyond what a door lock needed to be forced. Within 4 hours of the sequence beginning, every hyperspace corridor that humanity had been locked out of for 100 years stood open. Every gate was keyed to UEF codes. Every lane was clear. 300 years of closed doors opened in a morning. Donghyun stood on the bridge of his command ship after the last confirmation came in and looked at the corridor map on his screen. All green, all open. He put his hand flat on the display for a moment, the way a person puts their hand on something they want to be sure is real. Then he moved to the next task. Back at Earth's solar system, Tiho waited. He let time pass. He watched the Council fleet on his tactical screen. He watched the frantic short-range transmissions going back and forth between their ships scrambled, but the volume of them said everything about the state of their command structure. He watched the formation shift slightly, ships moving a few degrees this way and that, the way a group of people shifts when they are standing somewhere they suddenly do not want to be. He let them sit in it a little longer. Then he opened a channel to the entire Council fleet. His voice was the same as it always was, steady and unhurried, the voice of a man who had nothing to prove and nowhere to be except exactly here. "You have 20 minutes to stand down and return to your home systems," he said. "We will not repeat this transmission." He closed the channel. The bridge of the Sovereign was quiet. Officers watched their screens. No one spoke unnecessarily. The 20 minutes began. On the Council's flagship, the senior fleet commander sat in his command chair and looked at his tactical display for a long time. He was not a young man. He had served in the Council's military for 40 years, and he had seen difficult situations and come through them by making clear, hard choices without hesitation. He looked at the numbers now, 5-1, surrounding him on every side. Ships that had been invisible a few minutes ago and were now simply there, weapons ready, not moving, not threatening, just waiting. He thought about the Ragnarok platform sitting at the edge of his home system. He thought about the toll stations, all taken cleanly, with no blood, which somehow made it more serious rather than less. He thought about the 20 minutes. He gave the order to retreat. There was no argument from the other 11 species. The order moved through the fleet the way water moves through an open space quickly, finding every gap, reaching every ship. One by one, then in groups, the Council vessels turned. Their formations broke apart slowly at first, then faster. Running lights shifted direction. Engine trails stretched out toward open space. By the 19th minute, the corridor was empty. Tiho watched the last Council ship disappear from his screen. He did not stand up. He did not raise his voice. He turned to his bridge crew, men and women who had trained for this for years, who had held this secret and this readiness in them for longer than most people hold anything, and he said simply, "Mark it and report in." Then he sat down. In the war room under Seoul, every screen was green. 43,000 marks on the galactic map. Open corridors in every direction. The blockade gone. The Ragnarok platform holding still at the edge of Dominari space, quiet and patient, like a word that did not need to be spoken twice. Jun-ho stood in the center of the room and looked at all of it for a long moment. He did not celebrate. He was not the kind of man who celebrated before something was finished, and this was not yet finished. But he allowed himself one moment of stillness, one breath in which he looked at what humanity had built and what humanity had done, and what the galaxy now knew that it had not known this morning. Then he nodded once slowly to himself. "Well done," he said quietly, to no one, to everyone. Around him, the war room kept moving. Screens updated. Officers spoke in low, steady voices. The work continued because the work always continued, because that was the nature of the kind of people who did this kind of thing. But somewhere in the back of every person in that room, something had shifted. Something that had been held tight for a very long time had, just slightly, loosened. The galaxy had seen them now, really seen them, not the version of humanity the Council had built in its reports and its databases and its long years of comfortable assumptions. The real version, the version that had been out there in the dark all along, building, waiting, ready. The version that did not lose. The Galactic Council had stood together for 600 years. That was the number they used in their own histories, in their official records, in the speeches that High Chancellor Vrethais gave at the opening of every annual session. 600 years of unity. 600 years of shared law and shared order, and the understanding that the member species of the Council stood together, always, against anything that threatened the stability of the galaxy. 600 years. It took 48 hours to break it. Not from the outside, not from the UEF, not from any weapon or fleet or act of war. It broke from the inside, quietly, the way things break when they have been held together not by genuine agreement but by fear, and when the thing everyone was afraid of turns out not to be the thing they should have been afraid of at all. The first message arrived at the UEF embassy on Arcanum Prime 14 hours after the blockade's retreat. It came from the delegate of a small species called the Vihari, a quiet, careful people who had joined the Council 200 years ago and had never once voted against a Dominari-backed resolution. The message was short and written in very formal language, the kind of language that leaves many doors open and commits to nothing directly. It expressed a desire for conversation. It suggested that perhaps there were perspectives on recent events that had not been fully aired. It said the Vihari delegation would welcome a private meeting at Ambassador Yuna's earliest convenience. The second message came 3 hours later from a different species, then a third, then 2 more before midnight. 6 delegations in total, within 48 hours of the blockade failing. Yuna read each one at the small desk in the UEF embassy room. She read them carefully, the way she read everything, not for what was said, but for what was underneath what was said. She had been doing this for a long time. She knew the difference between a species reaching out because it genuinely wanted change and a species reaching out because it had just realized it was standing on the wrong side of something very large. Either way, they were reaching out. That was what mattered. She did not respond to any of them immediately. She made herself another cup of tea, sat back in her chair, and looked at the ceiling for a while. She was not in a hurry. In the Grand Forum, Vrethais was. He called the emergency session the morning after the blockade's retreat and stood on the Dominari platform with the posture of a man who had not slept and did not intend to admit it. He spoke for a long time. He spoke about the Council's history. He spoke about the principle that the member species stood together in moments of challenge, that unity was not optional, that the failure of the blockade was a temporary setback that could be answered with a stronger, more unified response. He proposed a second operation, larger, drawn from the full military capacity of the Dominari and their 4 closest allies, not 8,000 ships this time, but something more serious, something that even the UEF's hidden fleet would have to weigh carefully before dismissing. He spoke well. He always spoke well. He had been doing it for decades, and he knew how to make words feel like certainty even when certainty was the one thing that was no longer available. When the vote came, 12 delegates raised their hands in favor. 15 did not. Vrethai stood on his platform and looked at the result for a moment. His face did not change very much, because he was also very good at that. But the people who had known him for a long time, the ones who had sat in the forum through 30 years of sessions and learned how to read him the way you learn to read weather, those people saw something shift behind his eyes. He had never lost a vote that mattered. After the session ended, one of his own military advisors requested a private meeting. The man was old and gray and straight, with the manner of someone who had spent his whole career telling difficult truths to people who did not want to hear them. He sat across from Vrethai's in a small side room off the forum and spoke without softening anything. He said that the UEF fleet, at its confirmed scale, could not be defeated through conventional military engagement with any combination of assets the Council currently possessed. He said that the IRONVEIL technology alone made any offensive planning essentially useless, because you could not plan against something you could not see or locate. He said that the Ragnarok platform sitting at the edge of Dominari space was not a weapon that had ever been used, which meant that no one actually knew the full extent of what it could do, and that was in some ways worse than knowing. He said that continuing toward armed conflict was not strategy, it was pride. Vrethai listened to all of it without interrupting. When the advisor finished, Vrethai thanked him for his time and told him his concerns had been noted. Then he sat alone in the small room for a long time after the advisor left. He did not call another vote. 2 weeks after the blockade's failure, a formal invitation arrived at the UEF embassy. It was written on council letterhead and signed by a majority of the current member delegates. It invited Ambassador Yuna back to the Grand Forum for a full diplomatic session. The language of the invitation was different from any previous communication she had received from the council. It was not commanding. It was not a summons dressed up as a courtesy. It was, as close as the council had ever come in its 600-year history, a genuine request. She accepted. When she entered the Grand Forum this time, no one showed her to the lower seats. A council attendant led her to the center of the floor, to the seat that had sat empty in the middle of the round room for as long as anyone could remember, the one placed there as a symbol of balance, a philosophical gesture that had never been meant to be used in practice. Yuna sat in it. She looked up at the 27 platforms arranged in their wide circle above and around her. Some of the faces were unreadable. Some were openly hostile, not hiding it, not trying to. 6 of them gave her small, careful nods that meant different things but all pointed in the same direction. She set her datapad on her knee and began. She did not raise her voice. She never did. She spoke the way she always spoke in rooms like this one, clearly, patiently, in plain words that left no room for misunderstanding and no gap for later reinterpretation. She had learned a long time ago that complicated language in diplomacy was not sophistication. It was a place for people to hide. She did not intend to give anyone in this room a place to hide. The UEF required full membership in the reformed Galactic Council, equal standing, a permanent seat with the same weight as any other member, and a veto on any resolution that directly affected human space or human interests. Not a conditional membership, not a probationary status, not a seat with restrictions attached to it like strings. A full seat, an equal one. All hyperspace routes and trade corridors would be permanently open to UEF vessels without toll, restriction, or condition. Every lane that humanity had been locked out of would be treated going forward as open to all, the way all lanes should have been from the beginning. All economic sanctions against Earth and its colonies would be ended immediately, and reparative trade agreements would be drafted and signed within 30 days. The number of years those sanctions had been in place, and the documented harm they had caused would be the basis for calculating what fair reparation looked like. Formal written apologies would be issued by each species that had voted in favor of any sanction, blockade, or punitive measure against humanity at any point in the last 100 years. Not statements of regret, not expressions of hope for better future relations, apologies, clear ones. And humanity's 11 secret colony worlds, now revealed, fully populated, fully functioning, would be recognized under full galactic law as sovereign UEF territories, with all the protections and rights that any recognized territory in the galaxy was entitled to. The negotiations that followed lasted 4 days. Some delegates pushed back on individual points. 2 of them pushed hard, with the confidence of people who had not yet fully internalized what the last 3 weeks had demonstrated. Una let them push. She listened to every argument with the same patient attention she gave to arguments she agreed with. When she responded, she adjusted language where language could be adjusted without changing what the language meant, and she held every line that mattered without ever raising her voice or showing impatience. She had been doing this for 7 years in rooms that had never given her a fair seat. She was very, very good at it. By the end of the 4th day, everything she had come for was on paper, every point signed, every delegate's mark on the agreement, including the ones who had pushed back hardest and the ones who had stayed silent throughout. All of it, every single thing. On the last day before the session formally closed, Vrethais asked to speak. He had been mostly quiet during the 4 days of negotiation, present, visible, but not leading in the way he usually led. Now he stood on the Dominari platform and looked down at the center of the floor where Una sat, and he spoke with the voice of a man who had lost the argument, but intended to make sure the argument was remembered. He said that the Council was making a mistake. He said that humanity was a species defined by conflict, that the last 3 weeks had proven not that humans were ready for galactic partnership, but that they were ready for galactic dominance. He said that giving them power in the Council was like giving a fire a seat at a meeting about kindling. That one day, when they had what they wanted and knew the shape of the galaxy well enough, they would turn on every species that had ever crossed them. He said it clearly and with the full weight of his position and his years, and the room listened, the way rooms listen to powerful people even after the power has started to drain. Una waited until he was completely finished. She did not shift in her seat. She did not prepare a response while he was speaking. She simply listened, the way she had always listened, and when the last echo of his voice died in the domed room, she looked up at him. "We had 3 centuries to become warlords," she said. Her voice was quiet, not gentle, just quiet the way a fact is quiet. "We chose to become something you clearly had no category for, patient." She closed her datapad. She did not look at him again. The session ended. Back on Earth in the war room under Sol, Junho watched the broadcast of the closing session on the main screen. Jisoo stood beside him, her arms folded, her expression unreadable in the way it usually was when she was thinking hard about something. Sungho was seated at a nearby console, looking at data from the Council's signed agreements, making notes in the careful, thorough way he did everything. When the session officially closed and the screen shifted to a still image of the signed document, nobody said anything for a moment. Then Sungho looked up. He smiled just slightly, just briefly, the kind of smile a person allows themselves when something they worked toward for a very long time finally arrives. Then he looked back at his screen. Junho turned away from the main display. He looked at the galactic map on the side wall, the one that had shown 43,000 green marks for weeks, all those hidden ships, all that patient readiness. The map looked different now. The routes were open. The corridors were clear. The marks that had once sat in secret zones at the edges of known space now existed in a galaxy that knew what they were. He looked at Jisoo. "One thing left," he said. She nodded. She already knew what it was. She had known for days. Some men cannot accept the end of a world they built. Not because they are evil exactly. Not because they sat in dark rooms and planned cruelty for the pleasure of it, but because they had spent so long at the center of something, so long being the voice that decided, the hand that directed, the name that made other names go quiet, that the idea of that thing being over was simply not a shape their minds could hold. The 3 Dominari fleet commanders were men like that. Their names did not appear in any council record as having sanctioned what they did next. Vrethais had not ordered them. His office released a statement 2 days after the events, carefully worded, distancing the High Chancellor from all decisions made by independent military personnel acting outside official council command structure. Whether that statement was true was a question that historians would argue about for a long time afterward. What was not arguable was what the 3 commanders did. They took their fleets, 3 of them, roughly 900 ships in total, and they moved on 2 of humanity's newly recognized colony worlds. Both colonies sat in systems that had only recently been added to galactic charts. They were young places, built by families who had left Earth or the older colonies to start something new farther out. The kind of places where children were learning the names of new plants and new stars and new colors of sky that no human had ever had a word for before. The 3 commanders targeted them directly. It was meant to send a message. It was meant to say that paper and signatures and sessions in the Grand Forum changed nothing real. It was meant to say that the Dominari still decided what was acceptable in this galaxy, and that what had happened in the last 3 weeks was a temporary disruption, not a new order. It was the last decision the 3 of them ever made as military commanders. Junho had been awake for 31 hours when the alert came in. He was sitting at the long table in the war room under Sol, his jacket off, a half-empty cup of cold tea at his elbow, looking at a series of post-operation reports that Jisoo had sent through. The room was quieter than it had been in weeks. Most of the high-alert staffing had stepped down. People had gone home to sleep in real beds for the first time in a long time. The screen still glowed and the system still ran, but there was a different quality to the air in the room, something looser, something that had begun, very carefully, to believe that the hard part was done. The alert appeared on the main screen at 3:40. Junho looked at it, he read it once, he set down his cup. Then he stood up, put his jacket back on and walked to the command console. He had told Jisoo, 3 days before the council session ended, that he expected something like this. Not from the council officially. From the kind of people who existed at the edges of every large power structure, of the true believers, the ones who had built their entire identity around an order that was now changing, the ones who would rather cause destruction than accept that the world had moved past them. Jisoo had agreed. She had quietly kept 240 warships on full readiness in the outer sectors, close enough to respond to either colony world within minutes if something moved. Something had moved. Junho looked at the tactical screen. He looked at the 3 fleet signatures closing on the first colony. He looked at the readiness status of the 240 ships Jisoo had held back. Then he did something he had not done at any point in the entire operation. He took direct command. "Patch me through to the Sovereign," he said. The UES Sovereign dropped out of IRONVEIL cover at the edge of the first colony system, 16 minutes after the alert. It did not come alone. 240 UEF warships came with it, appearing all at once in a formation so precise and so immediate that it looked less like an arrival and more like a door opening. And on the other side of the door was something the 3 Dominari commanders had not prepared for. They had prepared for resistance. They had prepared for a fight. They had prepared for the kind of engagement where 2 forces meet at the line and push against each other and one eventually gives. They had not prepared for this. The UEF ships did not approach from a single direction. They were already everywhere, above, below, flanking, angled at every point in the formation where a Dominari vessel would have to look to find a way out. The movement between them was fluid and fast and utterly without hesitation, the way water moves. The way a single organism moves when all of its parts are in complete agreement about what they are doing. On every Dominari bridge, the tactical picture was the same: surrounded, outnumbered, and already too late. Donghyun's boarding teams launched within the first 2 minutes. The assault craft were small and fast, built for exactly this, for crossing the space between ships in the shortest time possible and entering through any access point available. His teams had trained for boarding operations for years. They knew how to move through unfamiliar corridors quickly, how to find the fastest route to a bridge or an engine room or a weapons bay, how to secure a space without filling it with casualties. They moved through the Dominari warships like a current moves through water, finding every passage, reaching every corner, fast and controlled and quiet. Dominari crew members who tried to resist were restrained. Dominari crew members who did not try to resist were held in place and treated without roughness. Nobody was killed. Nobody was left without a clear understanding of what was happening and why resistance was finished. 3 fleets, 900 ships, the whole of it took 11 minutes. When Donghyun's voice came through the comm link from the boarded Dominari flagship, his tone was the same as it always was, level and clear, the voice of a man reporting a completed task. "All 3 commanders in custody," he said, "crews secured, no resistance remaining." Junho stood on the bridge of the Sovereign and looked at the tactical screen. Every hostile marker had shifted from red to gray. Gray meant stopped. Gray meant over. "Understood," he said. "Good work." The bridge was quiet around him. Officers moved at their stations, logging, confirming, filing the reports that would go out to every UEF command center in the next hour. The colony worlds below both of them were untouched. No city damaged. No civilian harmed. No child frightened by the sound of something falling from the sky. 4 UEF personnel with light injuries from the boarding operation. That was the full cost. Junho stood still for a moment. He looked at the tactical screen. He looked at the colony world on the visual display, the curve of it against the dark, the lights of its small cities visible even from this distance, the pale color of its sky at the edge where day was beginning. Then he turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel," he said, "all frequencies galaxy-wide." The officer looked up from his console. He was young, younger than most people in the room, and for just a second his expression showed the weight of what that meant. All frequencies, every inhabited system, every ship, every station, every world with a receiver pointed at the sky. "All frequencies, sir," he said. "That reaches everyone." "Yes," Junho said, "that is the point." The officer turned back to his console. His hands moved. A light on the main display shifted from white to green. "Channel open," he said. "You're live." Junho did not straighten his collar or clear his throat. He did not look at notes because he had no notes. He had known what he was going to say before he boarded the Sovereign. He had known it, in some form or another, for a very long time. He spoke the way he always spoke, quietly, clearly, without a single wasted word. "The Unified Earth Federation is not your enemy. We have never wanted your submission, your resources, or your fear. We wanted a seat at the table you refused to give us, so we built our own. That table now has room for every species willing to stand on equal ground." He paused, not for effect, just because the next part needed its own space. "For those who are not willing, you have already seen what willing looks like." He nodded to the communications officer. The channel closed. The bridge stayed quiet for another moment. Then someone at the back of the room, nobody ever confirmed who, let out a long, slow breath. And then the room began to move again, because there was still work to do, and the kind of people who ended up on the bridge of a ship like this were the kind of people who understood that the work was never entirely finished. In Haiyan's lab in Busan, the lights were low. The IRONVEIL terminal sat dark on the main desk, powered down for the first time in 3 years. Every display was off. The room had the particular silence of a place that had been very loud for a very long time and had finally stopped. Haiyan was asleep in her chair. She had not meant to fall asleep there. She had sat down after the last system confirmation came through, intending to write the final project report while the details were still clear in her head. She had opened the document. She had written the title. Then her body, which had been running on too little sleep and too much urgency for longer than she could accurately remember, had simply stopped cooperating. Her head rested on her folded arms on the desk. Her breathing was slow and even. On her face, even in sleep, there was a small smile, not a large one, not a dramatic one, just the kind that stays on a person's face when the last heavy thing they were carrying has been set down. In Minu's office 2 floors above the lab, the light was still on. He stood in front of a wall of locked storage units with a keycard in his hand and looked at the unit marked RAGNAROK, schematic FILES, level 9 restricted. He had been standing there for about a minute without doing anything. Not because he was uncertain. He knew exactly what he was doing. He just wanted to hold the moment for a breath before he completed it. 9 years of work, 12 platforms, the most powerful weapons system humanity had ever built, designed with the specific hope that it would never need to be used, and which had, true to that hope, never fired a single shot. He pressed the keycard to the lock. He entered the archive sequence. The screen on the unit read ARCHIVED, indefinite. He looked at those 2 words for a moment. Then he nodded, as if agreeing with them. He turned off the light and went home. Field Commander Donghyun sat on the ground. Not in a command chair, not at a console, not in any official or military capacity at all. He sat on the open ground of a wide field on the first colony world, the one his teams had just defended without firing a single shot, and he held his personal comm device in both hands and waited while it connected. The grass around him was not quite the color of any grass he had seen before. It was somewhere between green and gold, a shade that shifted when the wind moved through it, a color that existed here and nowhere else in any place he had ever been. The sky above was pale blue with 2 moons already faintly visible, hanging in the daylight like suggestions. The air smelled like something he did not have a word for, clean and sharp and entirely new. His daughter answered on the 3rd ring. She was 9 years old and she had her mother's eyes, and she said the words she always said when she saw his face on the screen, and the sound of it went through him like warm light through a window. He turned the camera so she could see the sky behind him, the moons, the color of the grass. "What color is that?" she asked, pointing at the field. He looked at it for a moment. "I don't know," he said. "We get to name it." She thought about that very seriously for a second, the way 9-year-olds think about important things. Then she suggested a name, a word she had made up on the spot, something that sounded like a combination of gold and morning. He told her it was perfect. He meant it. Jisoo sat alone at her desk in the Seoul facility. The old files were still open on one side of her screen. Years of intelligence work, threat assessments, council movement reports, the deep record of everything humanity had watched and tracked and prepared against for 3 decades. She looked at them for a moment. Then she minimized them. On the other side of the screen, she opened a new file. She sat for a moment with her hands above the keyboard, thinking. Then she typed 1 line at the top of the blank page. Potential allies, uncontacted species, outer sectors. She leaned back. She looked at the line. She thought about all the space beyond the Council's mapped territory, all the systems that no civilization had yet catalogued, all the possibilities that opened up when a door that had been locked for a century was finally broken off its hinges. Then she leaned forward and began to type. Yuna stood alone at the observation window of the UEF embassy on Arcanum Prime. It was not an unofficial, tolerated room anymore. The embassy had been formally recognized that afternoon as a permanent UEF diplomatic presence on the station, with all the legal standing and protections that came with that. The door had a new plate beside it with the UEF seal on it. And that small piece of engraved metal had required 600 years of galactic history to arrive at, and she had looked at it for a long time before coming inside. The window faced outward, away from the station and toward open space. The stars were the same stars she had been looking at through the Grand Forum's domed ceiling for 7 years and 9 visits. They had not changed. They were still countless and cold and scattered across the dark in the way that made a person feel both very small and, if they were the right kind of person, very determined. But now every one of them had a road that led to it, and that road was open, and humanity could walk it whenever it chose, in whatever direction it chose, for whatever reason it chose. She put one hand flat against the glass. She stood there for a long time. In Seoul, in a park not far above the empty war room, Jun-ho walked alone. He had no uniform on, no rank on his collar, no datapad in his pocket, nothing that connected him to the last several weeks of his life except the tiredness in his body and the particular kind of quiet that settles into a person when something enormous has finally ended. He walked the path between old trees with his hands in his pockets. The city moved around him in all directions, the sounds of evening, traffic and voices and music from somewhere up the street, the smell of food from a place nearby, people going home, people eating dinner, children called in from outside by parents in lit windows, all of it ordinary and unhurried, all of it completely unaware of what had just finished. That was how it should be, he thought. The whole point of doing what he did was so that the people in those windows never had to know the exact shape of the danger that had been turned away from them. They got to just live. They got to just be ordinary people in an ordinary evening, and that was the whole thing. That was the entire point, and he had never needed any other reason than that. The path curved around a small pond and stopped at the water's edge. He stood there. A few birds sat on the far bank, still and quiet in the way birds go still when the evening cools. The water was dark and smooth and reflected the first stars that were beginning to appear in the sky above the city, faint at first, then steadier, one by one, the way they always came. He looked up at them. 300 years. 300 years of closed doors and locked corridors and high seats with laughter in them. 300 years of building in the dark, ships and systems and plans, and the kind of patience that most civilizations never find because they never have to. 300 years of being told, in 100 different ways and languages, that humanity was not ready, not worthy, not enough. And then one morning, all at once, 43,000 ships had appeared from nothing, and a wall had retreated in 19 minutes, and a woman had sat in a center seat and gotten everything she asked for. And 11 minutes had been enough to finish what 3 reckless men thought they could still start. They had called it a warning. Humanity had called it an opportunity. He put his hands deeper into his pockets and turned away from the pond. He walked back along the path, through the old trees, toward the lights of the city and the smell of food, and the sound of ordinary life going on the way it was supposed to go on. He was tired, he was hungry, his knees hurt. He went home,